Here's the thing. The semiconductor industry was invented and started in the United States of America. Today, we produce 12% of the world's chips. 20 years ago, it was 40%. That is an economic security problem and a national security problem. It's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity to lead again and create millions of jobs in America in the process. Government cannot do this alone. The private sector runs supply chains. So with this money coming to commerce, as I said, we want to get ahead of supply chain issues, prepare for resiliency, and I want to do it in partnership with the business community.
In 1968, during a period of significant civil unrest, the MSU Board of Trustees established the MSU Center for Urban Affairs, now named the Center for Community and Economic Development. Since its establishment, CCED, in collaboration with faculty, students, and community partners, has worked to co-create economic and community development initiatives with disenfranchised communities. During the unprecedented public health and social justice crisis precipitated in part by COVID-19, CCED stands to its mission by creating, applying, and disseminating valued knowledge through responsive engagement, strategic partnerships, and collaborative learning. To accomplish this mission, CCED has been devising innovative ways to create sustainable prosperity and an equitable economy in Michigan. In doing so, the Center seeks experts through their networks to identify, create, and implement innovative and effective strategies to break down these barriers of inequality. CERI is the Comprehensive Economic Recovery Initiative. Funded through the CARES Act and administered by the U.S. Department of Commerce, Economic Development Administration, CERI provided much-needed resources to support education, training, technical assistance, and research in partnership with communities and regions in Michigan that were hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic. The CERI program supports technical assistance projects in Michigan regions through student-led faculty-guided projects, live webinar series, recorded training videos, grant proposal development, and more. Focusing on 4 topical areas, or pillars, CERI helped Michigan communities become more resilient and better able to address emergency scenarios in the future. These pillars include resiliency planning, financial resiliency, circular economies, and 21st century communications infrastructure. Resiliency planning is the facilitation of comprehensive planning and capacity building that assists communities in planning for, surviving, and recovering after experiencing natural or man-made shocks. Falling under the resiliency planning pillar, the Resiliency Planning Thought Leaders webinar series accomplished just that.
The Resiliency Planning webinar series that we hosted focused first on the history of hazards that we have been impacted by in the past, specifically pandemics. We invited in a thought leader from MSU's campus to talk about her work with historic pandemics and how communities were resilient after the 1918 flu.
The Resiliency Planning Thought Leaders series was comprised of 6 live webinars and ran from March through April 2021. The webinars focused on several other topics, such as donut economics, dome ecology, recognizing how low-impact development can impact resiliency, and more.
The series had an impact on, we approximated more than 200 officials and leaders across the state and also across the Great Lakes region. So it wasn't just a Michigan audience. And so the impacts, we heard back when we did our evaluations, we heard that the audience members were inspired to amend their own plans, to look more into the resiliency topics that we had talked about, to make sure that they are put into their policies in the future. And now is the time, 2 years on, that we're going to do a long-term evaluation and reach back out to the people who have watched the webinar series and see just exactly how those ideas have been implemented. I learned there's a large appetite for this type of learning and for more informational webinars on the topic of resiliency planning. It seemed at the time that this program had filled a gap with people who are making policy. And from our perspective at MSU Extension, we cannot provide enough training and education about this topic. And so it's a matter of we need people to be able to conduct these trainings, to be a part of them, and bring them forward to the public, make a difference.
The next topical area of focus is financial resiliency, the collaboration with community, local, and state leaders to increase and expand the capacity of community financial institutions and individuals to invest in and support local businesses. This pillar supports initiatives to make community capital investing more available and normalized in Michigan.
So the idea of community investing is applying the notion of investments to the community space. It is especially important now because part of what happened in the pandemic was an exacerbation of existing inequalities in society. Now more than ever, we need those kinds of civic and built capital infrastructures that can lay the groundwork for a development that's more wholly inclusive. So part of what we're trying to do with community investing is invest in the whole community, creating that infrastructure that traditionally has been inequitable. Traditionally, we think of higher education as producing human capital. So we have had for generations specific scholarships for classes of people who are coming from low-income communities, right? Unfortunately, what often happens when we're developing individuals is that those individuals leave the community. They get their greater skills from going to university, and then there really isn't an easy way to see how they would fit back into the community they left. Again, this capacity problem. Beyond that, however, there's a growing realization that these large institutions, like Michigan State University, actually could be using some of their actual capital to invest in these communities as well. We know that MSU is a producer of jobs and other kinds of economic returns across this state. We also know that MSU pulls in a huge amount of resources and has an enormous endowment. If we invest in communities, we will provide that access to those resources that build businesses, that create new opportunities in communities, but also leverages those other resources that are now available from the government to try to build those infrastructures that will be critical to development going forward.
The next topical area of focus is circular economies, providing technical assistance to accelerate the growth of circular economy businesses in Michigan. This pillar supports activities that assist businesses in strengthening supply chains to reduce the potential for unanticipated shortages in needed goods and materials, reduce material waste streams, and reduce their carbon footprints.
Striving for zero waste has significant impacts on the health of the planet and all of its inhabitants. As we look to establishing a zero waste economy, I feel like we're stimulating human ingenuity to come up with new solutions that will support the betterment of all of us. So our goal in originally establishing the Zero Waste Consortium was really to seek out businesses and connect them with organizations and other service providers to just establish a network that would assist them in achieving their goals of sustainability, especially around management of their waste materials. We established the group through the financial and technical support of people from the private sector, public sector, nonprofit sector. So it just really established a lot of great opportunities. We, through our project, had some new people come to the table and new stakeholders that have interest. And that was really refreshing for us because, for those of us that are kind of recycling geeks, if you want to call it, that, it was really great to see that outside of our own industry, that there are other ideas out there and other people that are interested in this. Through this survey, we learned is that there's just not a good network out there for people that have materials that they're generating to connect them with the people that need those materials. And so, yes, there's people out here that have materials that they want to see managed more properly rather than sending them to a landfill. But how do we get them into the hands of those that could use them? that ultimately, as we continue down this path, is to bring about a community that kind of revolves around reuse and reutilization of materials, and that would attract entrepreneurs to get into this circular economy and this reuse economy, and to create talent building and job creation opportunities across the region to people, whether they're students. We have quite an interest from our educational sector here in utilizing those kinds of materials for the trades and teaching job skills and job training. And then, of course, the art sector for sure has lots of opportunities for sculpting and reutilizing those materials. And then, we have a whole reuse market of artisans who use those materials as well, we are finding pockets of these creatives all over our region, which again has been a real fun part of this particular project, was just finding out who's out there. We really had no idea all the potential that's out there.
The final topical area of focus is 21st century communications infrastructure. This pillar aims in working with key partners in the development and support of activities that increase internet access in rural and low-income urban communities. In doing so, the capacity of communities can be built, allowing for the use of online platforms for further civic engagement, commerce, and education.
I would say that often when people think of 21st century communications infrastructure, the first place they go to is broadband. And in my research, I'm actually not very concerned with broadband. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The first being that broadband development is in many ways a huge concern of academic researchers, of municipalities, county governments, federal governments, et cetera. And one of the things that we've seen happen over the past 2 decades of what's been a very intense and very expensive focus on expanding rural broadband is that no matter how much money that we pump into rural broadband, there's always basically a lag in development. Rural areas historically have always lagged behind urban areas with respect to broadband integration for a variety of reasons. And instead of thinking of how are we constantly working to catch rural areas up to urban areas, I think it's actually maybe more fruitful to think about how can we redesign and rethink network connectivity that speaks specifically to rural needs and rural experiences. So I work with this organization called Partridge Creek Farm, and they've been doing work on the ground in Ishpeming basically to not only expand access to local, healthy, fresh produce, but then also to educate young people and their families in Ishpeming public schools about what it means to grow your own produce, what it means to learn how to cook a meal using produce, things that a lot of these kids don't necessarily have access to. Partridge Creek Farm approached me about finding a grant opportunity to purchase some digital soil sensors. So I reached out for the Center for Community and Economic Development. They told me about the CCED program and the opportunities for community projects that were more oriented towards this idea of 21st century communication infrastructure and what that looked like. It turned out that there was a really good fit, so we applied for and received the funds. And those funds were used to purchase 6 digital agricultural sensors and fund an internship for the summer for a local college student in Marquette County to come and work with Partridge Creek Farm, basically setting up this digital infrastructure. So the goal for this whole project was to install these sensors that were able to wirelessly transmit this data back to this gateway that could then be utilized by the staff at PCF to be better informed about things like soil moisture levels, about things like humidity, about things like sunlight, all of these different factors that can impact the growth and quality of vegetables. So the next steps for this project with Partridge Creek Farm have already started. So in fall of 2022, the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development announced a new farm innovation grant opportunity for regional and state nonprofits, especially educational organizations, on advancing innovation in the farming sector in Michigan. And this was a really, really great opportunity for Partridge Creek Farm and myself to continue our partnership and to build off the work that was already supported by the Center for Community and Economic Development. I think that our work could also greatly expand the growing capacity of Partridge Creek Farm. And An expanded growing capacity also means that they're able to provide even more fresh produce for free or at cost to their local community. And as those of us who do community and economic development work, we know that access to fresh, healthy food is really, really important for strong and healthy communities. Also, in the long run, while, of course, digital connectivity is a major concern, especially in low-income communities, in rural and remote communities, the actual sort of know-how and ability to learn how to use new forms of digital technology in interesting and nuanced and maybe more cutting-edge ways is also really valuable. So I'm hoping that our work moving forward will be able to expand access to advanced forms of digital literacy that go beyond just sort of daily use of things like smartphones or iPads or computers and move into things that are more like workforce development, that develop skills so people can actually utilize them to get better jobs and to be able to sort of advance the work that they're doing on their farms or in their community gardens and hopefully give back to the community in some way after that.
The COVID-19 pandemic has shown both the strength of the nation's social and economic fabric, while also revealing many of its weaknesses. For Michigan communities to not only have recovered from this pandemic, but to be prepared for the future, it was essential for them to broaden and diversify their economies in the face of widespread uncertainty. The Comprehensive Economic Recovery Initiative, with the support of EDA and partners throughout Michigan, built on our strengths and helped us strategically work to address our vulnerabilities. CERI responded to these immediate critical community and economic challenges in Michigan, all while preparing our public and private sector partners to better anticipate and overcome future challenges. Communities with well-prepared comprehensive resiliency plans, a local financial infrastructure, regional supply chains for critical businesses, and reliable high-speed communications infrastructure recovered more swiftly from the global crisis precipitated by COVID-19 and will be better prepared for whatever natural or man-made catastrophe may occur in the future.